So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. There are some very interesting questions in the chat, so I hope we will have covered most of it in our discussions. Let me introduce myself. My name is Andrea Zahumenska. I'm currently a learning and development manager at the Bridge. I'm responsible for development of teachers. That includes mentoring and coaching. And with Mike, we run a coaching practitioner training program, as mentioned by Nicola. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you today.
Dobry den, that's my limit of my Slovak, really, but welcome to everyone. We're really excited to be here and, you know, overwhelmed, in fact, by the interest in the topic. We're really more looking at frames of curiosity rather than having all the answers. So there's going to be a lot of discussion, and it is a complex subject, but nevertheless, it's one that comes up a lot. So I notice in the chat box, people are saying, well, they train coaching, and it comes up a lot in that. So we experience it in our group as trainers. I've also, as Nicola said, I've been training as a therapist, and I'm intrigued by the differences and the similarities between coaching and therapy. It's not all one way. And in fact, most of my prejudices or preconceptions before I joined the therapy course, I've sort of been blown away. But as practitioners, our clients go through life cycles. So sometimes their needs change and they're more related to therapy. Other times it's more coaching. So, and also there's not much written up about this, I think, in terms of, you know, when we look at our textbooks for coaching and so on, it's assumed that there is a knowledge or an understanding of what coaching and therapy is, and the divide between them, the boundary, and actually it's not that clear. So I'm just going to share a slide with you to start with. I thought a metaphor might be useful. This is where I live. It's in Saltdean in Brighton. And when I was thinking about this topic, I was walking along the beach, as I sometimes do, and in the left side, sometimes the sea and the land are clearly defined. There's a clear distinction between land and sea. And then other times there's this wonderful area called a wave, technically known as a wave cut platform from my geography days, where the land and the sea occupy the same territory. And I'm just wondering if that's basically a useful metaphor for these distinctions. Because some people are looking at this from a therapy point of view, and actually someone in the pre-questions actually said, where does therapy end and coaching begin? Which is a useful way of thinking about the subject. So where does therapy end and coaching begin? So might be an alternative way of looking at it. Before we go, I was very self-congratulatory about the topic. I thought this would be a very interesting topic until I started thinking about it. I thought it's actually incredibly complicated because first of all, we got different types of therapy. And sometimes, so the difference between, say, Freudianism and existentialism is quite marked. Similarly, the difference between, say, sports coaching and career coaching would also be quite marked. So we've got healing, and also if we look at the origin of the word, sort of healing might be the basis of therapy. And apparently the origin of coaching is from the Hungarian word for wagon, so like a vehicle, but maybe coaching's origins are more about empowering or freeing. My next question to you is, what is a game? Can we define something like a game? Does anyone give us a definition of a game, perhaps in the chat box? Because the word game has a lot of complexity, and I think it might be analogous to coaching and therapy. So,
okay, so we have playing, fun activity, ball game with two or more opponents, again, fun activity, life, entertainment, interaction, equality between both players, interaction again, competition.
sure. So there's not really one feature of a game that we can point to. We can talk about racket games, we can talk about competitive games. And Wittgenstein, the philosopher, took on this problem a long time ago in the 1910s and said, we could talk about game of catch, we could talk about which is non-competitive, or game of tennis, which is competitive, games with cards, games with rackets, and so on. So there's no one meaning or one characteristic that's common to all of them. So he said there's a series of resemblances or family resemblances that link across the meaning. That gives us one meaning. There's not two meanings of the word game. There's one meaning that we understand, but there's no pinpointable or common traits that we can identify. That's definitely in a game and that's not. So these are sort of family resemblances. And I think when we talk about therapy, we may be talking about a specific therapy, or we may be talking about the family resemblance of therapy. I think this is important to bear in mind when we discuss this. And similarly with coaching, there's no one coaching, there's different types of coaching that have got family resemblances that make them coaching. And yet, as practitioners, we still have to make a distinction between coaching and therapy every time we contract, every time we meet a client, or as in the case of us when we're training coaching. So I'm going to invite you to discuss. We're going to go into breakout groups in a moment, but the first question will be a discussion of coaching and therapy. And just as sort of to warm you up a bit, these are some of the areas you might want to use as criteria. So is there a difference in time intervals between a coach and a therapist? So my therapist meets me weekly, whereas normally as coaches, we don't meet weekly, for instance. Is there a difference on the contracting basis? Sometimes as coaches, we have very long and wide contracting agreements. My therapist, and that may not be typical, there's very little contracting basis. The end results might be different. So maybe we're looking more to achieve certain measurable outcomes as a coach. Maybe in therapy, we're looking more for something like insight or awareness. The level of stuckness, the depth, the success. Who solves the problem? Is it the client? Is it the therapist? Is it the coach? And the time orientation. Are we more in the past with the therapist, or are we or not? And again, that may depend on the therapy. For instance, I know in existentialism, the past is a spark to the future and the focus is more on the future. So it does depend. So we're going to invite you, Andrea.
To invite you to discuss in small groups for about 15 minutes. And we would be grateful if then one of you could summarize the main points of discussions in the chat. And the main questions are, where are the differences, if any, between therapy and coaching? And if there is any time left, you can look at it from the client's point of view. So how do I choose as a client between a therapy and between coaching?
Yeah, the client or the coach, you can take one or the other to discuss. Yeah, fantastic.
So 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Opening those rooms up now.
What we're going to ask is anyone willing to say to us what went on in their group while others are posting into the chat some of the key learnings. So anyone who'd be willing?
Matthew, maybe?
Matthew?
One of the interesting things that came out of our conversation was, when is it good to have a collaboration between a coach and a therapist?
Oh, nice. Yeah.
We talked about a lot of other stuff about, therapies in the past, coaching in the future. Coaching is looking at stuff where therapy might just bring up the boo-hoos and get a bit of crying going on. But I think the most interesting thing for me was the thought of how that collaboration between two trusted professionals could really be beneficial for clients who may not be coachable until they fix the boohoo from the past.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I wonder if that might be a sign of the future, that maybe we will work more in a team with a coach and a therapist, or maybe it will be incorporated into a new kind of merged practice of a coach therapist, someone who's trained in both sides. So I think that's a really interesting discussion. I know that I work with a client at the moment who's going through a difficult time in their life. And so I'm kind of working alongside her therapist to review things. Yeah. Anyone else got any points?
Yeah, we have sorry for mispronouncing your name.
It's fine, Svea. In our room, what I just wanted to raise and say thank you to Mike also for opening the question about it depends on the model or the approach or where philosophically you're located as a coach and as a therapist equally, because we spoke a little bit about the past, future, present time frame, and we also spoke about the healing notion. And then said, but the narrative coaches would not agree with any of that, because anybody who works in a more social constructionist or interactional way would talk much more about what is the idea the client has about what they need in order to be able to live as they wish to live. And then what does that say about whether it is a more therapy aligned or more coaching aligned idea that the client has in their mind that needs to be respected by the practitioner, not necessarily evaluated by a practitioner.
I think that's a lovely point you've made there. So part of it is, as you say, in the mind of the client. It partly depends on the model and the topic. Yes.
Maybe to add to what was already said, we talked also about cultural differences. I think Nick posted one moment ago. Like in the country where I work, which is Poland, the therapy is seen very negative, in a negative way.
Yeah.
I'm meeting clients, corporate clients in corporate HR departments, sending clients, managers for coaching. And it happens often, especially since COVID, where when I can see that these clients bring the deep emotional problems, issues that are kind of a barrier to continue on the progress. And we need as coaches to be aware of this difference and to be able to support the client properly, which means it's not about just saying it's not my area. It's just opening up the discussion and helping the client to refer the client to a therapist, for instance, but to be enough educated and aware to be able to tackle these situations. But it happens that more and more as I see that that clients are being sent, let's say, to me, and I need to check check it out. If this is always for coaching, or sometimes it's just to first check what is the proper way to even start.
Some of the content is driven by the fact that therapy isn't so highly regarded, and equally in Slovakia, I think it's fair to say, Andrea, that it's the other way around, that coaching's not so highly regarded and therapy is, to some extent.
I mean, there are definitely cultural differences. I need to agree with Dorota that in the past, therapy had a really negative connotation in Slovakia as well, but it's changing, and it has changed after the pandemic quite a bit. And we have a lot of therapists and probably more coaches than therapists in Slovakia, for sure. Okay, Julia wanted to ask a question, and she, yes.
Hi, yeah, I thought I would give some feedback. I'm a coach and I'm a therapist, so I'm one of your few 12% people, I think it was. I practiced as a coach over 10 years ago, and as a therapist more recently. I at the moment I practice two different types of work with clients. I practice therapeutically as a counsellor, and I practice as a coach, and I contract for them both separately and very differently, with all the classic things like prices are different, frequency are different, length of sessions are different, but all very much still with the client solving the problems themselves. Coaching feels a little bit more like doing things with the client, whereas counselling is more much like being with the client, although obviously we can be both for either. But I just wanted to share that I practice very much therapeutically, but towards the end of the therapy with some clients, they want some more support, which tends to then turn into a little bit more like coaching. So we contract for that up front, but it's a bit like your beach analogy. You know, 1 minute we're doing cliff work and the next minute we're doing sea work. So they tend to be quite separate, but in the same relationship. From a coaching perspective, I never do therapy work with my coaching clients. I might work in a therapeutic way with them, and to highlight things with them and recommend them for therapy if I think they need to, but our relationship is very, very different. So at the moment, I'm much more the beach and the cliff, but I am exploring the concept of personal consultancy and therapeutic coaching. The VACP, who are my therapy organisation, are quite active on this topic, and hence joining today. I'm interested in where the EMCC are, and what my colleagues in this area of the profession are thinking. But yeah, so there is the blend. Practice the blend.
Yeah, that's a lovely. Thank you. That's very useful to have an actual working coach therapist, and the sort of kind of ways that you work. I've thought I'd take the discussion just a little stage further on this.
Mike, maybe I will add. Can I add one nice comment to this discussion, which I just brought from our group of the discussion with Adeboye and Claire. So we were talking shortly also very same topics we touched. And our key conclusion was that the therapist, basically it's a doctor with a medical background, but Adobe brought a nice statement, which is coaching, not a therapy, but can be therapeutical. So what we are talking that the coaching can take this role of therapy while not still being on this doctor side.
Okay, excellent. So there's ways that coaching might be therapeutic. Okay, one just to lighten it a little bit, I think Nick's here. My friend Nick, is he? I can't. But he told me a joke that his professor said, what's the difference between coaching and therapy? And his professor, Jonathan Passmore, said about €200. So that's something. But maybe because therapy is more drawn on private individuals and coaching is more work-based, maybe that's another difference. Okay. I've thought take the discussion one stage further, and that is to look at this model. And so this is one of the classic models that a lot of you may be familiar with. And that's the idea of life positions, where you and it's a view of yourself versus the view of the world in a way. And so you can be in this top right-hand box, which might be called an adult position, where I'm okay and you're okay. And that might be that you work together as a team. You accept that both parties have agency and freedom to and you're giving space for someone to discover their own solution. So, and my teacher of therapy says that if you're in adult position, you're not doing therapy. So, I mean, that's another way of distinguishing the two, that if you're actually having what might be called an adult discussion where you're not driven by the past, you're in the present moment, then you're not doing therapy. The bottom box might be more the territory, the C, if you like, for the therapist. I'm not okay, you're not okay. Where actually the therapist needs to spend a long time building trust to enable the person to move to one of these other life positions. And then the upper left, I'm not okay, you're okay. For me, this is the wave cut platform. It means that it could be occupied by both a therapist and a coach. So a coach might work on something like imposter syndrome. I'm not okay, you're okay. Where someone thinks they're not deserving of their job, or they have to try, they have to be perfect at what they do. Whereas a therapist might look at childhood injunctions. What has led you to feel not okay about yourself in many contexts? And lastly, the bottom right-hand box might be something from a coaching point of view, might be a leadership issue where the boss thinks they're great and their team are useless. So I'm okay, but the team are hopeless. You might approach that from a coaching point of view, from things like emotional intelligence, leadership, building connection, building rapport, and so on. Or you might look at it from a therapeutic point of view, which is the area, why is that person so low trusting and almost paranoid in their way of being? So that's one model, and the other model is Hae-Sun Moon, who's EMCC, often speaks to the EMCC, her dialogue orientation quadrant. Maybe it's, she says that we have the choice as coaches to talk about different things, and the client also, do we lead our client from a resourceful past to a desired future, or from a troubled past to a dreaded future? And Andrea, I was wondering if you could, that quote we saw in the chat box, if you could read that one, because I think that kind of overlaps onto this.
Okay, so there was a quote from, I think, Maureen. Let me just give me a second to find it. Yes, Maureen, who says that she works with senior leaders, and there is a definition that resonated with her. Therapy is the path of trauma and tears, and coaching is the path of hope and dreams. And sometimes these paths can crisscross, and it's our role to be sensitive to which path we are going down and how far.
And maybe as a therapist, it would be interesting to do this discussion with therapists, because I think maybe they would have a different point of view on that. But it's certainly maybe so one of the pathways that we might move in coaching. So, are you ready for another discussion? I bet you, yeah. So the next level of the discussion is, where are the areas of overlap between therapy and coaching? So again, we're going to go into groups. Does anyone want to make a comment before we do that? Is there any other points that come
Yes.
up? Yeah.
I kind of like I've got something that I'm thinking of. I'm both a Gestalt coach as well as a therapist. And I think for me the distinction has got to do with risk. You know, so I find that if and with therapy we're risk assessing all the time. And even if we're working in a coaching frame with a client, the client can always start to go towards a risk area. And the risk would be what happens when, something as simple as embodied intervention, like breathing. We often think, okay, breathing, everything's fine, and you know, it should just be a simple exercise. But to someone who has had a traumatic past where breathing is part of their adaptation, breathing exercises can be very triggering. So even when we are in a coaching frame and we start to do something like that, the risk is that it might trigger someone with a traumatic history that we aren't even aware of as a coach. So then the distinction would be, how risky is it to go there with the client, and how do we contain the risk? How do we make it safe? So I think that needs to be a consideration, whichever pathway we take.
Excellent. Okay.
We have another question from or a comment from Lars.
Yes, I just wanted to talk about, we spoke in our group about the importance of contracting, because I know that we're talking a lot now about what are the different theories, but I think it's important for all of us individually to draw the lines in our contracting phase of what is therapy, what is coaching, and what is even mentoring in there, so that at least the client understands what they are getting out of us.
That's a brilliant point. That's a brilliant point. Yeah, I think it does all come down to contracting at the start and explaining what your approach is to coaching, and how it might, where the cliff edge might be in terms of therapy as well. And also, it might be that there's one question we ask in when we're asking clients, where are the no-go areas? And sometimes that can be a useful as part of the getting to know the client. You know, what are outside the scope of our contract, and that can be useful as well. So the no-go area might be an area where you focus as well. Two more hands.
I think it's so important, you know, because of the discussion with between coaching and therapy. I take the point that, yes, it's best to address it at the beginning, the very beginning. My caveat on that is, even though one can make the walls clear, sometimes these walls are just but walls. They can be easily broken down, in the sense that, they all understand that. But, you know, sometimes for the client, oh, I'm okay. But, you know, that okay bit comes in that was being kicked off earlier on. And then it really comes down to the fact that it's not, it is really therapy that's here, the issue. And I think this is where there's really got to be a carve out. But having said there should be a carve out, in an ideal world, we are not in an ideal world, because we're dealing with human emotions, and that can lapse. And I think that's just what I want to indicate, that we should be very careful about that and mindful about that throughout the coaching process. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree, Sarish. And I've got clients that I've had for a number of years, and they're like, you know, their life cycle changes. So, you know, so sometimes they might experience extreme pain, or, you know, something tragic, and that, you know, is part of the life cycle of your relationship with that person. Yes, Lars, last.
I just want maybe therapists to put in the chat the actual quote, you know, this therapy is the path of trauma and tears. Coaching is the path of hopes and dreams. We've said that as coaches, but how do the therapists actually feel about this quote? So maybe in the chat, because we're running out of time, but I'd be curious to hear that side.
Yeah, yes, that would be very useful. And I know my own therapist would say that's not true. They'd say, you know, hope and dreams come through therapy as well. So, you know, so there'd be a disagreement there. Yeah.
There are some brilliant comments in the chat. So that's really, the chats are really, really useful. And there are even links to some research papers and so on. So thank you really for your input and for your comments.
Yeah, lovely. I hope that was another interesting discussion. Again, I'd be grateful if you can post any points of view in the chat. And also, is anyone willing to share what they talked about?
Clearly, the quote sparked a lot of debate and discussions.
Mm-hmm.
It was thought-provoking. Okay, so we have a question from Matthew.
I thought I'd get in there before the other 157 people. What came up for us was, I think, the challenges around trying to explain or get through to people the benefits of coaching so that you can get that first engagement, that first chemistry. Because a lot of what I do is I try and come up with ways of trying to convince people to let me just talk to them. That's the first step. Get that engagement, get that lead in place. Because I'm a sales guy, but I'm a coach as well. So that's what came up for us, partially because we forgot the question. So we had to talk about something. But it is interesting. It's just trying to figure out how can you get the word out, especially to non-optimistic people like Irish people, which is what I am. And trying to convince them that coaching isn't all this voodoo stuff and therapy and bringing up the boohoos and all that. And it's difficult, you know.
Yeah, there's an interesting point there that often it's the relationship that counts. You know, we're not necessarily talking coaching therapy. It is, do I connect? Does that person have presence for me? And then in that sense, that goes beyond coaching and therapy. It's the power of being together in a way, working together. Yes, Alfonso?
Hello, everyone. Well, for me, the important thing is, in the end, is to be aware of what you are doing in the first step. And so I'm a coach myself, and I'm a biologist, and I've been working in the commercial world for a number of years. So I'm not a therapist, I know that. And but at least on coaching is what I have to explain, to my client. What is it about? What do I expect? How is our relationship going to be running, and so on. And one important point for me is once we have someone to talk to, is to be aware if this person is on therapy with someone else or is being visiting another professional. And because this is important thing, and when this has happened to me, I've advised him or her to let know the other professional that she was visiting or he was visiting me, and we were having conversations, And something that we know as coaches is that an important tool for us is to listen, and to serve the client. Sometimes the best service we have for a client is to suggest that he should or she should be visiting someone else, because we don't have simply the skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So some great points there, Alfonso. I think the idea of discovering if the client has a therapist, if they're willing to share that, and maybe discussing where you can help and where the therapist can help as part of the contracting is also part of the potential teamwork that you can do.
Maybe
Charlotte,
maybe one more question from Charlotte, because she's been trying to ask for a while. Hello.
So I did a co-production process with my fellow colleague Esther in our breakout. And Esther, if you want to come off mute and help with this, we came up with a model, and I don't know if you can see this. It talks about the direction of travel that we're coming from in terms of whether we're coming from a perspective of therapy or if we're coming from coaching. There's also a piece about where much of the work takes place, which is in the intersection between coaching and therapy. But we also talked about the maturity of the individual coming from for coaching or therapy, their personal maturity, but also the maturity of the professional providing the service. Esther, did you want to say anything to add in?
Yeah, we talked about the path and what you need in certain stages in your life, and that you oscillate, and it's like a spiral that is moving upward, and you oscillate between therapy and coaching at different types in your life, depending on your maturity and your purpose of what you're trying to go to.
Absolutely. So it's almost a journey, a life journey where we might need both. There is a question that I have no answer to, but I raised the question, which I think people have also discussed in their group, that certain methods have a therapy-based methods. So if you're using a therapy-based method, does that infuse into the coaching? And then there's other tools such as metaphor that are deeply therapeutic sometimes without being therapy as people are making the decision. So I suppose the checkpoint or risk point is to check your method as well, to make sure that it is actually a coaching aspect to your method as opposed to a therapy aspect, if that's possible. And I think the other thing that you're saying, Esther and Charlotte, is maybe the distinctions are more blurred. You know, I know since COVID, I know that sort of great barrier, COVID, but I've found my own coaching clients are much more into this sort of insight area of life rather than the outcome area of life. So what does it all mean? Why have we started this business? You know, why are we continuing this business? Rather than, even though the business is successful, let's say, they still question what's it all about. I think there's mental health issues continuing to be, present in many areas. And I read in management today, there's a mixture of coaching and therapy emerging as a sort of combined practice. And below all this, or above all this, is the kind of philosophical background that we have. And actually maybe everything together is things like the views of the phenomenologists, the philosophers, because it's about how much the subjective and the objective world are distinguishable, and that comes down to our philosophy, if you like. So although we can talk about the land and the sea, perhaps, as Esther and Charlotte have said, it's all, at different times we're on the sea and other times we're on the land, and sometimes we're observing it. So I thought together across the world, we will be doing both at different times.
I think one person in my group said she's a coach therapist. I don't know whether you want to give her space to talk a little bit about her duality of roles.
Yeah, I'm thinking coach is more in the future and in the present, and the therapist is more in the past. But I think the roles are really similar at one point. And I think something like the mind and the body is very important to bring in the coaching and in the therapy.
So you see quite a lot of overlap
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pilar has a question.
No, it's quite brief, and it's just one of the because traditionally we've thought about these concepts as past, future, dreams, and blah blah, which most of us weren't really agreeing on that quote. And one of them is depending on topic and depth, and I wonder if that's also kind of expired as a clear cut differentiation between therapy and coaching, right? It's
Can you expand on that a little bit? So what would be a coaching topic and what would be a therapy topic?
That's the point. It's like if you want to I don't know, change positions and become a manager in 3 years' time, then that's a coaching subject. And then if you are I don't know, wondering about what's your next step in life, that's and because you've had a difficult past and you're looking for a brighter future, maybe that's therapy. So that's why I'm saying the question is the topic. It's not anymore a clear cut.
Sometimes people come with me and they want to change another job, and they have a problem with the manager, and then you ask why are the problems, and then you talk and talk and talk, and then the clients break, and then it's a sexual misbruik. You know what I mean? Just sometimes you talk about something, but it's a small issue, but after, and then it's a therapy session.
So it goes a lot deeper, what appears to be an apparently small problem.
Yes.
Therapy. Yeah, so we can't really box and dice humans and their lives, can we?
No.
So there is that that risk. I was going to, if we've got, it's almost time. Nicola, do you remember your joke you told? It's not really a joke, but your redefinition.
I've forgotten.
You said to me when we first talked about this subject, you said something along the lines that, is coaching really just socially accepted therapy?
Oh, yeah.
Which
I think we kind of like, it came up as a bit of a theme about cultural differences as well, didn't it? About the acceptability and the acceptance of, oh, I'm going for coaching as opposed to, oh, I'm going for therapy. I used to work in mental health. I was people who know me know I'm a communications person primarily, and I used to head up communications for a mental health organisation. And it was really back in the day where it just wasn't talk aboutable as much as it is now. It was very much stigmaed, and you know, if there was a disclosure of something you might need to have therapy for, it put you at a disadvantage in your relationships and your ability to get a job and all this kind of stuff. And the stigma associated with that is still there. I mean, I think it's getting better. We've got more and more people talking openly about, you know, the benefits of therapy, which is brilliant, and it's okay to have a therapist. Who knew? Yeah. Who knew it was okay to have a therapist? But that social bit, the socially acceptable form of therapy.
Yeah. So at different times, as people are saying, therapy can be, you know, I've spent the last year having therapy and being on a course, and it's magical, really. It's really made a difference.
Yeah.
Vasa, you got a question? I can't resist your hand.
If we go Vasso's hand, and then we can continue the conversation within the networking, because I know that Mike and Andrea are going to stay for that too. But Vasso.
Hi. My point of view is, because I work both as a coach and a therapist at different sessions, definitely. What I found out is that you don't get rid of the past. We are humans. We carry our past together. When someone comes to us about a future plan for coaching, definitely he or she carries the past. So if we know how to resolve that past issue that is causing him or her to block from moving on, then we could do it. If we don't know the how, maybe some coaches don't have those special techniques, the therapeutic techniques about the past, then it's okay to say, that's it. But if we know how to do it, and if we know that the person needs to go from point A to point B, but we know that he carries a past, we all carry a past, because if he knew how he will do it, he will do it.
True.
He comes to us because most of the cases they know what to do, but they can't do it. Something is stopping them.
Mm-hmm.
So if we put labels, now I'm doing therapy, now I'm doing coach, that means that we're building walls. So if we know how to help the person, let's do it.
Cool.
That's my point of view.
And we might just do it in a slightly different way, but being aware of the wave cut platform, let's say, and the difference between the land and the sea.
I just want to just ask Mike and Andrea. Mike, I know that you are doing your additional learning and training at the moment with therapy and with coaching and the studies that you're doing at the moment. The discussion that we've had today, is there anything that you're taking from the discussion today that will help you or has made you think in a different way? Is there anything which you're taking from today?
I think I'm taking a lot. I'm certainly going to work through the chat box and go through. There's some great comments. I think it's confirmed to me that it is a complex area that we need to talk more about as coaches and therapists. It would be nice to develop some clearer guidelines. Whether there's an answer at all, I'm not sure. I think it's one of those things that is quite subjective. But it would be nice maybe to develop some guidelines that will help people in certain situations. But I think ultimately it partly depends on your background, who you are as a human being, your philosophy, and the kind of therapy coaching model that you have. So, as a friend of mine says, is it a simple problem or complex? I think it's both simple and complex.
I love the beauty in the complexity and the simplicity.
Absolutely.
And how about you, Andrea? What are you taking from this session?
I mean, it's a very complex topic because it can be looked at from different angles and different points of view, and discussions can be for hours and hours. But what I'm taking away really is to, if we look at it as an adult discussion, then whether you are being in the position of an adult person who would like to solve whatever you have, that for me is the main difference between coaching and therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mike and Andrea, for what has been a fascinating, really fascinating and ranging, just not just a discussion, but like a pinging of ideas and a sharing of resources. Save the chat, everybody, because it's just packed with brilliant stuff. And just before we move into the networking, I am going to let Lars kind of like play us out while I set up the breakout rooms for networking. So Lars, over to you.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to throw a little bit of a sideball because actually this goes out to Svea van der Horn, who put a fantastic comment in the chat. We've spoken about the concern between therapy and coaching from a therapy and coach perspective. But my question is an open one to everybody is how much do the clients actually care? And Svea's comment was we've been discussing the border territory, but how do we expand on how all practitioners are ethically required to have discussions with clients about what resources are available to them and why they are choosing this specific modality?
Cool.
So I think that's just an open thing. It's too long to think about now, but how much do the clients care about these things?
Yeah, that's great thought. I also want to thank Nicola, who's absolutely brilliant at this stuff.
Thank
And
you.
without her, we would have failed totally. So thank you so much, Nicola, for everything you do for the
That's
EMCC
lovely to
and
hear.
for
Thank
us
you,
in
Mike.
particular.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola, for helping us to manage the meeting. And thank you, everybody, for your valuable comments, questions, insights. So it's been extremely interesting to read your comments and to listen to you.
I'm seeing a book being held up by Charlotte. What's that one? Personal consultancy. Go back a little bit, Charlotte, and I'll screenshot it. There we go.
Oh,
Right, put that in there. I've put that in the chat for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not a lot written, so that is a very useful resource. Definitely.